Understanding how the Ice Age broke evolution for human beings will help us understand how we're going to evolve in other planets such as Mars. I'm not an expert in evolution, but as a physics or science student, I've been interested in evolution in other planets, and I've already done other videos in which I explain some parts of evolution. The first humans to leave Africa were the Neanderthals during the Ice Age. So in order for them to be able to adapt to this cold environment, they had to build up a bigger body and bigger brains to produce heat so that they don't die in the climate of the Ice Age. And then the humans that were left in Africa, they evolved to become Homo sapiens because of the harsh conditions in Africa. In Africa, even though it was the Ice Age, it was dry and it was very hot. During this time is when we started farming. This is agriculture and keeping animals. And being in this harsh condition meant that we developed longer limbs and smaller bodies so that we can dissipate heat and survive. So during this period, we also had to be social and develop complex tools to be able to increase our chances of survival. After this development, another subset of human beings left to go north, but it was still during the Ice Age. The skills that we acquired in Africa, we used them to survive these harsh conditions. Let's put a pin on the human beings that didn't leave Africa, because we're going to discuss that later on and understand how race and how different we are based on the evolutionary situations we were in. The human beings that spread throughout Eurasia into this cold and more seasonal climate, they needed to plan ahead much more than the ones that were left in Africa. So these were the Paleolithic human beings that needed to store food, make warm clothes, and have shelters for harsh winters. So their tools had to be more complex than the one that they already got, such as spears. This is what helped them outcompete the Neanderthals that were already there in the north. So before this, when these subsets of human beings were still in Africa, women used to pick food, berries and roots. They only had a limited time to actually pick out the food. They had to find more cognitive abilities such as weaving, needlework, garment making, leatherwork, and pottery. The further north these human beings had to migrate, the more challenges that needed cognitive abilities they faced, such as raising a child successfully during winter. This spreading out of Africa during the Ice Age is essentially what created races: Blacks, Europeans, and East Asians. So this is some sort of spectrum of races. So you have to fit yourself. Where do you fall? So according to the studies done by the book Race, Evolution, and Behavior, human beings are different. So I'll make a sketch so that you can understand what I mean. So this is the blacks, the whites, and then the Asians. So according to this book, blacks are over here with everything. So this is brain size, this is intelligence, and this is any cognitive abilities that they might have. So white people are closer to Asians, which Asians are the best of human beings, and then comes the white people. And then there's a spectrum, and then these are the blacks with average IQ of 70. So since the environment was different, black people, since it was different from Europeans and Asians, which evolved during the Ice Age in the cold winters, their cognitive abilities couldn't match that of those people. Us were living comfortably. So what we evolved to become is to have small brains, violent, become criminals, and test higher to be likely to be psychopaths and engage in a lot of sex. So this topic has been ignored for a long time because of what Nazis used it for. So this is the topic of eugenics. So if you agree with the eugenics, you're basically a Nazi sympathizer, and most people don't want to be Nazi sympathizers. And this ignorance, ignoring facts, basically from these books. This ignorance has become way more because of the Black Lives Matter movement. But to me, this makes sense because we evolved in different environments. So basically, we'll have different features. There will be things that black people are better than white people at, Asians better than blacks and white at. So the argument for these types of research was that most violent crimes happen in black neighborhoods. Most people in jail are black people. I don't know where the psychopaths is coming from because, Jeffrey Dahmer. The sex was based on the number of people living with HIV. So back in 1998, 1 in 10 South Africans were living with AIDS. 1 in 3 women were living with some sort of STD. But if we throw away these biases and actually look at history with how it is and see how dominant civilization became to be, and then we'll understand that that these researchers were doing was really nothing but biasness. If we look at a 3,200-year cycle that shows the rise and fall of civilization, we'll understand that it was about to be our time. Let me explain. As temperatures rose in the north, civilizations thrived, and as they fell in the south, civilizations thrived. There's an ideal temperature zone when the temperatures are cool and it becomes the best place to live and be successful in an economy. Egypt was the first to dominate in 1200 BC. The ideal zone moved up north to Greece as the earth was getting warmer. This was during 800 BC to 600 BC. Rome was next around 300 BC, and this went on up until Christ era, up until it fell around 280. When the temperatures rose up again up north, this was time for the Viking, the northern Scandinavia people. And then they became dominant around 980 to 80. The next cooling was around 1580. This is the time that Spain dominated. This is south of Europe. Portugal, Netherlands, and all those countries became explorers. They were exploring the world and Asia. This led to the exploration of all these other countries. This is when they got to sub-Saharan Africa. And we all know what went down when they got here. The next cooling was the Industrial Revolution. And what's interesting to me is that after the Industrial Revolution, the next cooling was us. This was the perfect time for us to become dominant as a civilization. We see this with the increase of Zulu people. This is when we're starting to gather up all the niggas. So back to eugenics. If really black people have an IQ of 70, that means we are retarded. There is no other way around it. Even in the army in the United States, you're not allowed if you have an IQ less than 83. So no black people should be in the army unless they are really exceptional. Now the crime rates are actually lower in sub-Saharan Africa than in most of the world. The sex thing, I don't know about y'all, but we all know what they did with AIDS. Come on, only black people and gays die. Come on, for real? For those that made it to the deep end, first of all, thank you. But I personally have 3 brothers that died from HIV and AIDS, and an uncle. And right now, currently, there are multiple members in the family that have HIV, and we've been living with it for such a long time. And during the early 2000s, those were some of the most difficult moments. Not just for me because I was a kid, but side effects of HIV. People, they didn't know what they were, so we couldn't tell with the symptoms that this particular person had AIDS. So it was really a struggle to actually deal with those people because maybe you might think they have mental illness or what we have, amajus, I don't know, it's like witch doctors, or if you're from somewhere else. So it's a whole different story